Certainly one of the aspects of the Tea Party values is to reduce the size of government, which would get into a discussion about what's the appropriate size of government. Critics like to suggest that we'd like no government at all, which is an absolutely silly and frankly stupid attempt to criticize us. Question about government. I like to put it as, what is your theory of government? If you can look at the conservative and liberal views, they do kind of become bookends on this issue. The problem is that we find that the liberals are not willing to talk about this in the way that we think most clearly depicts the inherent conflicts of government. So put simply, you can go back to Plato and Aristotle, and it's always about the individual versus the state, the individual versus the group, the individual versus the community. By way of extension, the extreme expression of favoring the community actually has the philosophical term communitarianism, which does sound remarkably like communism, and yes, it's related. The most extreme expression of communitarianism, which we think is characterized by Asian societies, is that the individual is not important. The individual does not count. The individual has no real voice with respect to the community. On the other hand, the heart and soul of American political values is the exact opposite, where our Constitution is predicated on protecting the rights of individuals, in the belief that liberty does extend to individuals who act responsibly in society. So those really end up being the two extremes, and they really constitute what is the basis, if you will, for a discussion about a theory of government. Now, it does become a little bit dicier when you try to talk about the concept of rights. So we have what's called a Bill of Rights, and it started out with 10 that involved protecting the individual from encroachments by a government that would be seeking ever more power. It was understood by our founding fathers that that would be the case. However, what is odd, George Carlin did a comedy bit on this where he just carried on and made fun of the whole concept of rights.
Just when these American citizens needed their rights the most, their government took them away. And rights aren't rights if someone can take them away. They're privileges. That's all we've ever had in this country is a bill of temporary privileges. And if you read the news even badly, you know that every year the list gets shorter and shorter and shorter.
Because when you look at different countries, be it Germany, be it Sweden or England, they too have their own version of rights, and they each have a different sized list. Some has 12 rights, some have 16 rights, some have 23 rights. So what are the right rights? It's not easy to say. We can take this discussion and begin to narrow it down a little bit by talking about the contrast between what we'll call democracy and socialism. In the case of socialism, again, this is a point of view that starts to slide in the direction of communitarianism. It's the belief that it's the state that should be in control, resources should be controlled by the state, and the individual doesn't have all that much of a role to play. From the conservative point of view, when you talk about the concept of fascism, which is another discussion we'll have later, you'll find that fascism is really much more closely associated with socialism than it could ever possibly be with any notion of democracy. So when you come back to the issue of rights, the argument is that there's a concept of, quote, human rights. So this concept of human rights developed in socialism takes the position that you have an inherent right to health care, an inherent right to an education, an inherent right to a place to live. And it just seems, from the conservative point of view, there's no end to this list of these sorts of, quote, material rights. Instead, the Founding Fathers recognized that if you start to designate or extend rights through the government, there's really no end. Okay, plus the possibility that you could be put in the government position of granting the rights and taking them away. So we instead focused through the concept of natural law on the idea of inalienable rights. And that, of course, was a short list, and the idea was that we would trust individuals to take care of the rest. Well, we've seen that change, unfortunately, over the years. We find ourselves in a situation where the degree to which the government, the state, is encroaching on our individual rights is only getting worse. And we'll be talking about things like civil liberties with respect to the National Defense Appropriation Act, how property rights are being impinged on as a result of some things that Obama did. We're talking about related things concerning something called Agenda 21, which also impinge on property rights. There's really an extraordinary range of things that are being done to interfere with what we see as individual rights.